Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into one of humanity's most revolutionary moments. Not the invention of the wheel, not the first written word, but something far more primal and transformative. We're talking about the moment our ancient ancestors first tamed fire. And trust me, this story is nothing like what you learned in elementary school about cavemen rubbing two sticks together. The reality is so much more fascinating, so much more complex, and honestly so much more brutal than you could imagine. If you're enjoying these deep dives into our prehistoric past, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. And I'm always curious about where you're all watching from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. I love seeing our little community of history enthusiasts connect from around the globe. Now, dim those lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's journey back together to a world that would terrify and amaze you in equal measure. We're heading back 5.5 million years to explore how early humans didn't just discover fire, they mastered it. And that mastery changed everything. Picture this. You've just been transported back to East Africa, roughly 5.5 million years ago. The landscape stretches endlessly before you, a vast savanna punctuated by dense woodlands and winding rivers. But this isn't the Africa you know from nature documentaries. This is a world in flux, where massive climate shifts are reshaping entire continents and forcing every living creature to adapt or perish. The air smells different here, thicker, more alive somehow. You can taste the dust kicked up by massive herds of animals that have no names in modern languages. Creatures that make today's elephants look like house cats roam freely across plains that stretch beyond the horizon. And somewhere in this primordial wilderness, our earliest ancestors are taking their first tentative steps toward becoming human. But here's what's incredible. These aren't the knuckle-dragging cave dwellers you've seen in movies. These early hominins, as scientists call them, are already displaying signs of intelligence that would put some modern humans to shame. They're crafting tools, developing social structures, and most importantly for our story tonight, they're beginning to understand something that would separate them from every other species on Earth. Fire. Now, before we go any further, I need to shatter some myths that Hollywood and popular culture have drilled into our heads. The idea that early humans discovered fire by accident, maybe when lightning struck a tree, is complete nonsense. The mastery of fire wasn't a lucky break. It was a deliberate, methodical process that took hundreds of thousands of years to perfect. And the evidence we have suggests it was far more sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. Let me paint you a picture of what the world looked like when our ancestors first began their relationship with fire. We're talking about a time when the Earth itself was going through dramatic changes. The climate was cooling, forests were shrinking, and our early relatives were being forced out of the trees and onto the open savanna. This wasn't just an environmental shift. It was an evolutionary pressure cooker that would forge the very essence of what it means to be human. The first thing you need to understand about fire mastery is that it didn't happen overnight. We're not talking about some prehistoric genius who suddenly figured out how to make flames appear. This was a gradual process that likely began with something much simpler. Observation. Imagine you're one of these early hominins. You're walking across the savannah after a thunderstorm, and you come across something extraordinary. A tree, split and smouldering from a lightning strike. The wood is glowing red, giving off intense heat. And somehow, mysteriously, this heat is cooking the insects and small animals that got caught in the blast. You taste this cooked meat, and something magical happens. It's easier to chew, easier to digest, and it tastes incredible. This moment, multiplied across thousands of encounters over hundreds of thousands of years, laid the foundation for everything that would follow. Our ancestors didn't just stumble upon fire, they studied it. They learned its patterns, its behaviors, its moods. They became fire whisperers long before they became fire makers. But here's where the story gets really fascinating. Recent archaeological discoveries have completely revolutionized our understanding of when and how fire mastery actually developed. Sites in Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa have revealed evidence of controlled fire use that's far older than anyone previously believed. Sites and tool-making areas that stretch site, called Kubifora in Kenya. Archaeologists have uncovered what are talking about fire hearths, cooking back millions of years. Ate appears to be evidence of controlled burning from nearly 2 million years ago, but the sophistication of these sites is what's truly remarkable. These weren't random campfires. They were carefully planned, strategically located heating and cooking centers that show clear signs of repeated intentional use. The early coals for later use, and most humans who built these fires understood wind patterns. They knew how to select kindling was still entirely at the mercy of the right types of wood for different purposes. They knew incredibly how to transport fire across vast distances. This wasn't primitive about what this means for a moment. While camping, this was advanced thermal engineering. Think figured out how to contain flames, how to bank hours beyond sunset. They could venture into territories that they went. They could extend their active the rest of the animal environment. Our ancestors had figured out how to carry a piece of the sun with them wherever were previously too cold or too dangerous, and unlocked calories that were previously They could process food in ways that dramatically improved nutrition and accessible. But the mastery of fire went far beyond simple survival advantages. It fundamentally rewired the human brain and transformed our social structures in ways that we're still discovering today. Consider the social implications of controlled fire. Before fire, early hominins were essentially prisoners of daylight. When the sun went down, activity ceased. Predators owned the night, and survival meant finding shelter and hoping for the best. But fire changed all of that. Suddenly, the day could extend well into the evening hours. This extra time wasn't just used for practical purposes. It became social time, time for grooming, for storytelling, for planning, for teaching young ones the skills they'd need to survive. Fire created the first classrooms, the first theatres, the first community centres. It's not an exaggeration to say that human culture was born around the campfire. Archaeological evidence supports this theory in fascinating ways. At fire sites across Africa, researchers have found evidence of tool-making workshops, areas where bones were systematically processed for marrow, and spaces that appear to have been dedicated to teaching and learning. These weren't just places where people ate and slept. They were hubs of innovation and knowledge transfer. The cognitive effects of fire mastery were equally profound. Cooking food didn't just make it taste better. It fundamentally changed human nutrition and, by extension, human brain development. Cooked food is far easier to digest, which meant our ancestors could extract more calories and nutrients from their meals with less energy expenditure. This improved nutrition had a direct impact on brain growth. The human brain is an incredibly energy-hungry organ, consuming about 20% of our total daily calories, even when we're at rest. The improved nutrition made possible by cooking provided the fuel necessary for increasingly complex neural development. But it gets even more interesting. The process of maintaining and controlling fire required new types of thinking. Our ancestors had to develop an understanding of cause and effect, planning for future needs, and complex problem-solving skills. They had to learn to read environmental cues, predict weather patterns, and manage resources across time. Fire maintenance became one of humanity's first true technologies. It required specialized knowledge that had to be carefully preserved and passed down through generations. A group that lost its fire could face extinction, so firekeeping became a sacred responsibility that shaped early human societies in profound ways. The archaeological record shows us that different groups developed different fire-making techniques based on their local environments. Coastal populations learned to use different materials than inland groups. Mountain dwellers developed methods adapted to high-altitude conditions. desert peoples mastered techniques for conserving fuel in resource-scarce environments. This regional specialization led to the development of distinct cultural traditions around fire use. Some groups became known for their ability to create fires in wet conditions. Others developed expertise in making fires that produced minimal smoke for stealth purposes. Still others specialized in creating fires that burned at specific temperatures for particular types of tool making. These innovations weren't just practical. They were the beginning of human technology transfer. Groups would trade fire-making knowledge along with other goods. Successful techniques would spread across vast distances, carried by migrating populations and refined through countless generations of experimentation. The mastery of fire also revolutionized human hunting strategies. Before controlled fire, our ancestors were primarily scavengers and gatherers, competing with other predators for access to fresh kills. But fire changed the game entirely. Controlled burning became a hunting tool. Early humans learned to use fire to drive prey into ambush sites, to clear vegetation that concealed dangerous predators, and to create grasslands that attracted grazing animals. They could smoke out small game from burrows and use fire to process tough plant materials that were otherwise inedible. This transformation from scavenger to hunter had massive implications for human social organization. Hunting required cooperation, planning, and communication in ways that scavenging didn't. Fire-based hunting strategies demanded coordination between multiple groups, sophisticated timing, and detailed knowledge of animal behavior patterns. The evidence for these advanced hunting strategies comes from sites across Africa, where archaeologists have found the remains of large-scale animal processing operations. These weren't opportunistic scavenging sites, they were organized industrial operations, where multiple large animals were systematically butchered, cooked, and preserved using fire-based techniques. At one site in Tanzania, researchers discovered evidence of what appears to be a massive elephant processing operation from nearly 2 million years ago. The site shows clear signs of controlled burning, systematic bone breaking for marrow extraction, and organized meat preservation. This wasn't primitive subsistence living. This was sophisticated resource management that required advanced planning and coordination. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of early fire mastery was how it enabled our ancestors to expand into previously uninhabitable territories. Fire was the key that unlocked entire continents for human colonization. Without fire, early humans were essentially trapped in the warm, tropical regions of Africa. But with controlled flame, they could venture into colder climates, higher altitudes, and environments that would have been lethal to their ancestors. Fire became humanity's first portable climate control system. The expansion patterns we see in the archaeological record tell an incredible story. As fire mastery improved, we see evidence of human presence spreading northward from Africa into what would become the Middle East, then into Europe and Asia. These weren't random migrations. They were calculated expansions made possible by increasingly sophisticated fire technologies. At sites in the Caucasus Mountains, archaeologists have found evidence of human habitation from over 1.7 million years ago. The remarkable thing about these sites is their altitude and climate. Without fire, these locations would have been completely uninhabitable for tropical primates. But the evidence shows not just temporary visits, but sustained occupation over thousands of years. The fire hearths at these high-altitude sites reveal techniques that were perfectly adapted to mountain conditions. The early humans living there had learned to build fires that could burn efficiently in thin air, using local materials that produced maximum heat output. They had developed methods for keeping fires burning through harsh mountain winters, and they had learned to create warming fires inside cave systems without suffocating themselves with smoke. This wasn't just survival. This was environmental engineering on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the development of agriculture thousands of years later. Our ancestors were terraforming entire regions, using fire to reshape landscapes to suit their needs. The evidence from European sites tells a similar story of incredible adaptation and innovation. At Schöningen in Germany, archaeologists uncovered a site that's been called the Pompeii of Paleolithic Europe. The site, preserved by unique geological conditions, provides an incredibly detailed snapshot of how early humans were using fire 400,000 years ago. What they found was mind-blowing. Not just evidence of fire use, but evidence of fire management on an industrial scale. There were specialized areas for different types of burning, workshops where wooden tools were fire-hardened, and cooking areas where the remains of processed animals tell stories of sophisticated culinary techniques. The wooden spears found at this site revealed just how advanced fire-based tool-making had become. These weren't sharpened sticks. They were precision-engineered hunting weapons, carefully shaped and fire-hardened to exact specifications. The tips were heat-treated to create incredibly hard points, while the shafts were fire-straightened to ensure perfect balance and flight characteristics. But perhaps most remarkably, chemical analysis of the wood revealed that different species of trees were selected for different parts of each spear, with each wood type fire-treated, using specific techniques to optimize its properties. This level of materials engineering wouldn't look out of place in a modern workshop. The social implications of this technological sophistication were staggering. Creating tools of this quality required not just individual skill, but organized knowledge systems. Someone had to discover which woods worked best for which purposes. Someone had to develop the fire treatment techniques. Someone had to teach these skills to others and ensure the knowledge was preserved across generations. This points to something that fundamentally challenges our assumptions about early human societies. These weren't simple bands of hunter-gatherers, barely scraping by. They were complex civilizations with specialized knowledge, organized production systems, and sophisticated cultural institutions. The evidence for this complexity comes from sites across Europe and Asia, where archaeologists have found what can only be described as prehistoric industrial complexes. At Bilzingsleben in Germany, researchers uncovered a site that shows clear evidence of organized craft production, with different areas specialized for different activities, all centered around sophisticated fire management systems. These sites reveal that fire mastery had evolved far beyond simple cooking and warmth. Our ancestors had learned to create fires with specific temperature ranges for different purposes. They could produce the intense heat needed for advanced tool making, the controlled temperatures required for food preservation, and the steady, long-burning fires necessary for extending working hours into the night. The temperature control techniques they developed were particularly impressive. By carefully selecting fuel types, controlling airflow, and managing fire placement, they could create burning systems that maintained consistent heat output for hours or even days. This wasn't accidental. Chemical analysis of ash deposits shows that these fires were burning at precisely the temperatures needed for their intended purposes. The fuel selection alone reveals incredible environmental knowledge. Different situations called for different types of burning materials. Dense hardwoods for long-burning heat sources, resinous softwoods for quick ignition and bright flames, specific bark types for producing particular smoke characteristics, animal fats for waterproofing and preserving flames in wet conditions. This knowledge wasn't just practical, it was scientific. Our ancestors were conducting systematic experiments in combustion chemistry, testing different combinations of materials and techniques to achieve specific results. They were developing the first protocols for quality control, ensuring that their fire-based technologies produced consistent, reliable results. The preservation techniques they developed using controlled fire were particularly revolutionary. By learning to create different types of smoke and controlling exposure times, they could preserve meat for weeks or months, dramatically extending the utility of successful hunts. They developed techniques for smoking fish, drying plant materials, and even creating preserved foods that could sustain them during long migrations. These preservation methods enabled something that had never existed before in the animal kingdom: long-term food security. For the first time, Early humans could plan for future scarcity, stockpile resources during times of abundance, and support larger group sizes than would otherwise be possible. The archaeological evidence for these food preservation systems is found across multiple continents, suggesting that these techniques spread rapidly through early human populations. At sites in Africa, Europe, and Asia, researchers have found similar smoking installations, drying racks, and storage systems, all showing clear evidence of fire-based food processing. But the most profound impact of fire mastery was on human communication and culture. The extended daylight hours created by controlled fire gave our ancestors time for activities that went far beyond survival. They had time to develop language, to create art, to explore abstract thinking, and to build the complex social relationships that would become the foundation of human civilization. The evidence for this cultural explosion is written in the archaeological record in fascinating ways. Sites with sophisticated fire management systems consistently show evidence of artistic activity, tool experimentation, and what appears to be teaching and learning spaces. These weren't just places where people survived. They were places where human culture was born and nurtured. The development of language itself may have been directly tied to fire mastery. The social coordination required for advanced fire management demanded increasingly sophisticated communication. Groups needed to share knowledge about fuel types, weather patterns, and fire-making techniques. They needed to coordinate hunting strategies that involved controlled burning. They needed to organize the complex social relationships that surrounded firekeeping responsibilities. Recent research has suggested that the neural pathways involved in fire management overlap significantly with those used for language processing. The same cognitive skills required for maintaining fire, planning fuel gathering, and coordinating group fire activities are remarkably similar to those needed for complex verbal communication. This connection between fire and language development helps explain why human communication evolved so rapidly compared to other cognitive abilities. Fire mastery created both the need for sophisticated communication and the social context where that communication could develop and flourish. The evening gatherings around controlled fires became humanity's first universities. Knowledge was shared, stories were told, and cultural traditions were established. The flickering flames that extended the day also extended human consciousness, creating space for the abstract thinking that would eventually produce art, music, religion, and science. Archaeological evidence from fire sites across the world shows increasing sophistication in toolmaking, artistic expression, and symbolic behavior. These sites reveal that as fire mastery improved, so did every other aspect of human culture. The two developments were intimately connected, each driving advancement in the other. The mastery of fire didn't just change what early humans could do, it changed who they were. It transformed them from another species of African primate into something entirely new. A creature that could reshape its environment, extend its capabilities, and build a technological civilization that would eventually span the globe. Tonight, as you sit in your climate-controlled home, surrounded by the products of millions of years of technological development, remember that it all started with a small group of our ancestors who looked at a smoldering tree and saw not just destruction, but possibility. They saw the power to transform their world, and they seized it with both hands. The mastery of fire fundamentally rewired how early humans understood time itself. Before controlled flame, our ancestors lived in a world divided into rigid segments. Day meant activity, foraging, tool-making, social interaction. Night meant vulnerability, hiding, hoping to survive until sunrise. But fire shattered this binary existence and created something revolutionary: the evening. This wasn't just about extending daylight hours. It was about creating an entirely new category of human experience. The glow of controlled flames created a liminal space, a twilight world that was neither fully day nor fully night. in this space, something magical happened. Our ancestors began to think differently. Archaeological evidence from sites across Africa and Europe reveals that these evening gatherings around fires weren't random social events. They were structured, purposeful activities that show clear signs of organization and intention. Excavations at Chesem Cave in Israel have uncovered fire hearths that are nearly 400,000 years old, surrounded by clear evidence of systematic tool production, food processing, and what appears to be organized teaching activities. But here's what's truly remarkable about these sites. The spatial organization reveals that different activities were happening in specific zones around the fire. Closer to the flames, where light was brightest, archaeologists find evidence of detailed work: tool sharpening, hide preparation, intricate carving. Further from the fire, in the dimmer areas, they find evidence of larger group activities, bone processing, food sharing, and spaces that seem designed for storytelling and group communication. This wasn't accidental. Our ancestors had learned to orchestrate these evening gatherings with the precision of a modern theatre director. They understood that different types of light supported different types of activities, and they arranged their social spaces accordingly. The cognitive implications of this are staggering. For the first time in evolutionary history, a species was creating structured learning environments. These firelit evenings became humanity's first classrooms, workshops, and cultural centers, all rolled into one. Recent neuroscience research has revealed something fascinating about how firelight affects the human brain. The flickering, warm light produced by flames triggers specific neural responses that are completely different from the steady, cool light of day. Firelit environments promote what researchers call associative thinking, a kind of mental processing that connects disparate ideas and generates creative insights. This means that our ancestors weren't just extending their working hours, they were creating optimal conditions for innovation, problem solving, and cultural development. The evening fire wasn't just lighting up the darkness, it was lighting up the human imagination. The evidence for this creative explosion is written in stone, literally. Sites with sophisticated fire management systems consistently show dramatic increases in tool diversity and complexity. At Pinnacle Point in South Africa, archaeologists have found evidence that the development of advanced fire control techniques coincided exactly with the appearance of the most sophisticated stone tool technologies seen anywhere in the prehistoric world. These weren't just better versions of existing tools. They were entirely new categories of technology that required completely different manufacturing techniques. Heat treatment of stone, for example, allowed toolmakers to create edges that were sharper than surgical steel and more durable than anything that could be produced by simple knapping. The process of heat treating stone tools reveals just how sophisticated early human understanding of fire had become. Different types of stone required different heating temperatures and cooling rates to achieve optimal results. Flint needed to be heated to precisely 350 degrees Celsius and cooled gradually to prevent cracking. Quartzite required higher temperatures but could be cooled more rapidly. Obsidian demanded incredibly precise temperature control to avoid shattering. This wasn't trial and error experimentation. Chemical analysis of heat-treated tools from sites across Africa shows that early humans had developed standardized protocols for different materials. They had created the first quality control systems, ensuring that their advanced technologies produced consistent, reliable results. But the most mind-blowing discovery came from a site in South Africa called Blombos Cave. Here, archaeologists found evidence of heat treatment techniques that were so advanced, so precisely controlled, that modern experimental archaeologists struggled to replicate them even with contemporary equipment. The tools found at Blombos weren't just functional, they were beautiful. Many showed evidence of decorative elements that served no practical purpose beyond aesthetics. This was art integrated into technology. Beauty merged with utility in ways that wouldn't be seen again until the Renaissance. This emergence of aesthetic sensibility alongside technological advancement wasn't coincidental. Both developments were direct products of the extended evening hours made possible by controlled fire. For the first time, our ancestors had time to perfect their craft beyond the minimum requirements for survival. The social structures that developed around fire management were equally revolutionary. Controlling fire wasn't something that could be done casually or individually. It required coordination, planning, and specialized knowledge that had to be carefully preserved and transmitted across generations. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups developed complex hierarchies around fire-keeping responsibilities. Certain individuals became specialists in fire production and maintenance. These firekeepers held positions of enormous importance within their communities because a group that lost its fire faced potential extinction. But these weren't simple authoritarian structures. The evidence points to something much more sophisticated. Collaborative knowledge systems where different individuals contributed different expertise to collective fire management. Some specialized in fuel selection and gathering. Others became experts in fire production techniques. Still others developed expertise in fire-based cooking and food preservation methods. Sites across Europe and Africa show evidence of these specialized roles preserved in the archaeological record. At Terra Amata in France, researchers found distinct activity areas that suggest different individuals were responsible for different aspects of fire management and fire-based technology production. What's remarkable is how these specialized roles seem to have developed simultaneously across multiple human populations that had no contact with each other. Groups in Africa, Asia, and Europe all developed similar organizational structures around fire management, suggesting that these social innovations emerged naturally from the demands of advanced fire control. The knowledge preservation systems that developed around fire technology were humanity's first educational institutions. Teaching someone to make and maintain fire wasn't like teaching them to knap stone or gather plants. Fire knowledge was complex, multifaceted, and absolutely critical for group survival. Evidence from teaching sites shows that fire education involved multiple stages and different types of instruction. Novices first learned to maintain existing fires before being taught ignition techniques. They mastered fuel selection before learning advanced temperature control methods. They understood basic cooking before being introduced to complex food preservation techniques. This structured approach to knowledge transmission reveals that our ancestors understood something fundamental about learning and skill development. They had discovered that complex technologies required systematic instruction and practice, and they had developed formal methods for ensuring that critical knowledge was successfully passed to the next generation. The implications of this educational revolution extended far beyond fire technology. Once early humans had developed systematic methods for preserving and transmitting complex knowledge, they could apply these same techniques to other areas of technology and culture. Archaeological evidence shows that sites with advanced fire management systems consistently display more sophisticated technologies across all domains. Better tools, more complex hunting strategies, more elaborate artistic expressions, and more organized social structures all appear together at sites where fire control had reached advanced levels. This wasn't just correlation. The cognitive skills required for advanced fire management, long-term planning, systematic observation, precise execution, collaborative problem solving, were exactly the skills needed for every other aspect of human technological and cultural development. Fire mastery was creating a feedback loop that accelerated human development across all domains. Each advance in fire technology enabled advances in other areas, which in turn supported further innovations in fire control. Our ancestors had stumbled onto something that modern engineers would recognize: a self-reinforcing system of technological development. But perhaps the most profound impact of fire mastery was on human migration and colonization patterns. Fire didn't just allow early humans to survive in new environments, it allowed them to transform those environments to suit their needs. The expansion of human populations out of Africa wasn't a desperate flight from deteriorating conditions. It was a calculated conquest enabled by increasingly sophisticated fire technologies. Each new environment presented unique challenges that required specific fire-based solutions, and early humans proved remarkably adept at developing these solutions. In the forests of Europe, they learned to create fires that could burn efficiently in humid conditions, using damp wood and fungal tinders. In the grasslands of Asia, they mastered techniques for controlling large-scale burns that could reshape entire landscapes. In Arctic regions, they developed methods for maintaining fires in extreme cold using animal fats and specialized shelter configurations. Each of these adaptations required not just individual ingenuity, but collective learning and knowledge sharing on an unprecedented scale. Groups migrating into new territories had to rapidly develop expertise in local materials, weather patterns, and environmental conditions. The speed at which these adaptations occurred suggests that early human populations had developed sophisticated systems for sharing technological knowledge across vast distances. Successful innovations spread rapidly through migrating populations, carried by individuals who served as living libraries of specialized knowledge. Archaeological evidence from sites across Eurasia shows remarkably similar fire management techniques appearing simultaneously across thousands of miles, suggesting that early human populations maintained extensive networks for sharing technological innovations. These knowledge networks were humanity's first information superhighways, carrying technological advances across continents with remarkable efficiency. A fire-making innovation developed in the forests of Germany could appear in the steppes of Central Asia within a few generations, refined and adapted for local conditions, but clearly recognizable as part of the same technological tradition. The establishment of these knowledge networks marked a crucial turning point in human development. For the first time, our species was operating as a truly global entity, with technological advances in one region benefiting populations thousands of miles away. This global connectivity accelerated human development in ways that are still difficult to fully comprehend. Instead of each population having to independently develop solutions to similar problems, successful innovations could spread rapidly across the entire human network, allowing each group to build upon the discoveries of others. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of this accelerated development. Tool technologies, hunting strategies, and artistic traditions that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop in Africa appeared in Europe and Asia within tens of thousands of years, having been carried there by migrating populations who brought not just the technologies themselves, but the knowledge systems needed to continue developing them. Fire mastery had transformed humanity from a collection of isolated populations struggling independently for survival into a connected network of collaborating communities, each contributing to and benefiting from collective technological advancement. This transformation would prove to be one of the most significant developments in the history of life on Earth. For the first time, a species had developed the ability to rapidly share and build upon innovations across its entire global population, creating a form of collective intelligence that far exceeded what any individual or single group could achieve alone. The mastery of fire hadn't just warmed our ancestors' bodies and cooked their food. It had ignited something far more important, the spark of human civilization itself. The networks that carried fire technology across continents also carried something else, something that would prove even more transformative than the flames themselves, the beginning of human symbolic thought. As our ancestors gathered around their carefully tended fires each evening, they weren't just sharing practical knowledge about fuel and temperature control. They were developing the cognitive frameworks that would eventually give birth to language, art, religion, and abstract reasoning. The evidence for this symbolic revolution is subtle, but unmistakable. At fire sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years, archaeologists have found objects that serve no obvious practical purpose, carefully shaped stones that were never used as tools, pieces of ochre that show signs of deliberate grinding and mixing, shells with holes drilled through them, transported hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. These weren't random collections of interesting objects. They were the first human attempts to create meaning beyond immediate survival needs. Our ancestors were beginning to think symbolically, to imbue objects and actions with significance that transcended their physical properties. The development of symbolic thinking was intimately connected to fire management in ways that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. The cognitive processes required for advanced fire control, planning for future fuel needs, understanding cause and effect relationships, coordinating group activities, are remarkably similar to those involved in symbolic reasoning and abstract thought. But there's something even more fascinating happening here. The social dynamics created by fire management were generating new forms of human consciousness. For the first time in evolutionary history, our ancestors were regularly engaging in activities that required them to model the mental states of others. Consider what's involved in teaching someone to make fire. You can't just demonstrate the physical actions. You have to understand what the learner is thinking, anticipate their mistakes, recognize when they're confused, and adjust your instruction accordingly. This requires a level of social cognition that goes far beyond anything seen in other primates. Archaeological evidence suggests that these teaching relationships were becoming increasingly sophisticated. At sites across Africa and Europe, researchers have found what appear to be dedicated learning areas, spaces specifically designed for instruction in fire-related technologies. These aren't just places where knowledge was transmitted from older to younger individuals. The spatial organization and artifact distribution suggest much more complex interactions, collaborative problem-solving sessions, group experiments with new techniques, and what can only be described as prehistoric research and development activities. The most remarkable example comes from a site in Spain called Bolomor Cave, where archaeologists uncovered evidence of what appears to be systematic experimentation with different fire-making techniques. Over a period of thousands of years, the inhabitants of this site tested dozens of different approaches to fire production, carefully documenting their results in ways that allowed future generations to build upon their discoveries. The level of systematic investigation revealed at Bolomor is staggering. Different areas of the cave were used for testing different variables: fuel types, ignition methods, hearth configurations, ventilation systems. The accumulated evidence shows not just trial and error, but genuine scientific methodology applied to fire technology development. This wasn't primitive fumbling toward better techniques. This was organized research conducted by individuals who understood the principles of experimentation and hypothesis testing. Our ancestors were becoming scientists, and fire was their laboratory. The cognitive demands of this experimental approach were enormous. Systematic investigation requires abstract thinking, long-term memory, pattern recognition, and the ability to separate relevant variables from irrelevant ones. These are precisely the mental capabilities that distinguish human intelligence from that of other species. But the development of these capabilities had consequences that extended far beyond fire technology. Once our ancestors had learned to think experimentally, they could apply these same cognitive tools to every other aspect of their lives. Archaeological evidence shows that sites with advanced fire experimentation consistently display innovations in all other technologies. More sophisticated tools, more effective hunting strategies, more elaborate food processing techniques, and more complex artistic expressions all appear together at locations where fire science had reached advanced levels. The feedback effects were extraordinary. Each breakthrough in fire technology enabled advances in other domains, which in turn supported further innovations in fire control. Our ancestors had created a self-reinforcing cycle of technological development that was accelerating at an unprecedented rate. This acceleration is visible in the archaeological record as a dramatic compression of developmental timelines. Technologies that had taken hundreds of thousands of years to emerge in earlier periods were now developing and spreading within tens of thousands of years. The speed of this technological evolution was creating new challenges for early human societies. Traditional methods of knowledge preservation and transmission were struggling to keep pace with the rate of innovation. Groups needed new ways to store, organize, and share increasingly complex information. The solution they developed was revolutionary: the creation of external memory systems. Instead of relying solely on individual recollection, early humans began using physical objects and spatial arrangements to store information outside their own minds. Fire hearths themselves became information storage devices. The way stones were arranged, the types of materials found in different areas, the patterns of ash and charcoal deposits, all carried encoded information about successful techniques and important discoveries. Experienced firekeepers could read these arrangements like books, extracting detailed information about what had worked, what had failed, and what needed to be tried next. These hearth libraries preserved knowledge across generations and allowed groups to build systematically upon previous discoveries. But the most sophisticated information storage systems were found in the tools themselves. Advanced fire-treated implements weren't just functional objects, they were repositories of technological knowledge, encoding information about heat treatment temperatures, cooling rates, material selection criteria, and manufacturing techniques. An experienced toolmaker could examine a fire-treated blade and extract enormous amounts of information about the methods used to create it. The color patterns in the stone revealed heating temperatures. The fracture characteristics indicated cooling rates. The edge geometry showed which finishing techniques had been employed. These tools were serving as technological DNA, carrying information about successful manufacturing processes that could be decoded and replicated by skilled practitioners. Early humans had created their first information technology, and it was embedded in the objects they used every day. The development of these external memory systems marked a crucial transition in human evolution. For the first time, our species was accumulating knowledge faster than individual lifetimes could contain. Cultural evolution was beginning to outpace biological evolution as the primary driver of human development. This transition had profound implications for human social organization. Groups with better information systems could develop more sophisticated technologies, which gave them significant advantages in competition for resources and territory. Archaeological evidence shows that populations with advanced fire-based information systems consistently expanded their territories and displaced less technologically advanced groups. This wasn't just military conquest, it was technological displacement, where superior fire mastery translated directly into superior survival capabilities. The expansion patterns reveal something remarkable about how these technological advantages propagated. Advanced fire techniques didn't spread through conquest or migration alone. They also spread through voluntary adoption by groups that recognized their superiority. Sites across Europe and Asia show evidence of rapid technological transitions where local populations abandoned traditional fire methods and adopted more advanced techniques, apparently through peaceful knowledge transfer, rather than population replacement. This voluntary technology adoption suggests that early human groups had developed sophisticated systems for recognizing and evaluating technological innovations. They could identify superior techniques when they encountered them and had organizational structures that allowed for rapid implementation of new methods. The speed and scale of these technological transitions were unprecedented in evolutionary history. Within a few thousand years, advanced fire control techniques developed in Africa were being used by populations across 3 continents, adapted for local conditions, but clearly recognizable as part of the same technological tradition. This global spread of fire mastery was creating something entirely new, a planet-wide network of technologically connected human populations, each contributing to and benefiting from collective innovation systems that spanned continents. But the most profound impact of advanced fire control wasn't on human technology or social organization. It was on human consciousness itself. The cognitive capabilities developed through fire mastery were beginning to generate forms of awareness that had never existed before in the natural world. The evening gatherings around controlled flames were becoming laboratories for exploring the depths of human mental experience. Extended hours of social interaction in fire-lit environments were generating new forms of communication, new types of emotional expression, and new categories of abstract thought. Evidence from fire sites across the world shows increasing sophistication in symbolic behavior during this period. Decorative objects, artistic expressions, and ritual activities all become more common and more elaborate at locations with advanced fire management systems. These weren't separate developments happening alongside fire mastery. They were direct products of the extended social time and enhanced cognitive capabilities that fire control had made possible. The flickering light of controlled flames was illuminating more than just the physical darkness. It was revealing previously hidden depths of human consciousness, capabilities, and experiences that had been dormant in the human mind, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Our ancestors were discovering that they were more than just another species of clever primate. They were beings capable of transcending their immediate environment through imagination, creativity, and abstract reasoning. They were becoming human in ways that went far beyond mere biological classification. The mastery of fire hadn't just given them control over their physical environment. It had unlocked the infinite landscapes of human consciousness, revealing potentials and possibilities that would eventually reshape not just their own lives, but the entire planet they inhabited. As they sat around their carefully tended flames each evening, watching the dance of light and shadow, our ancestors were witnessing something magnificent. The birth of human civilization itself, emerging from the marriage of flame and consciousness that would carry their descendants to heights they could never have imagined. The glow of those ancient fires still burns within us today, carried forward through millions of years of innovation and discovery, reminding us that the spark of human greatness was first kindled not in palaces or laboratories, but around simple hearths where our ancestors learned to bend the forces of nature to their will. Yet even as fire mastery was transforming human consciousness and social organization, it was also creating entirely new categories of environmental interaction that would fundamentally alter the planet's ecological systems. Our ancestors weren't just adapting to their environment anymore. They were actively reshaping it on a scale that no other species had ever achieved. The controlled use of fire as a landscape management tool represents one of humanity's earliest and most successful experiments in ecological engineering. Long before agriculture, before cities, before written language, early humans were using carefully planned burns to transform entire ecosystems to better serve their needs. Archaeological evidence from sites across Africa reveals sophisticated understanding of fire ecology that rivals modern environmental science. Early humans had learned to read vegetation patterns, predict weather conditions, and time their burns to achieve specific ecological outcomes. They understood that burning grasslands at particular times of year would promote the growth of plants that attracted game animals. They knew that controlled forest fires could create clearings that were easier to traverse and offered better visibility for hunting. They had discovered that strategic burning could eliminate dense undergrowth that harbored dangerous predators and disease-carrying insects. But their ecological knowledge went far deeper than simple cause and effect relationships. Evidence from multiple continents shows that early human populations had developed detailed understanding of fire succession patterns, the complex series of ecological changes that follow controlled burns. They knew which plant species would be the first to regenerate after a fire, which animals would move into burned areas, and how long it would take for different types of vegetation to re-establish. This knowledge allowed them to plan burning cycles that maintained optimal conditions for their preferred food sources and hunting targets. The sophistication of these management systems is revealed in the long-term archaeological record. Sites that show evidence of systematic burning over thousands of years display remarkably stable ecological patterns, suggesting that early humans had achieved something approaching sustainable ecosystem management. This wasn't accidental. Chemical analysis of soil cores from these sites reveals that our ancestors were monitoring the long-term effects of their burning practices and adjusting their techniques to maintain desired ecological conditions over multiple generations. They had become ecosystem architects, using fire as their primary tool to design landscapes that supported larger human populations while maintaining ecological stability. This was environmental engineering on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern industrial agriculture. The success of these fire-based landscape management systems enabled human population densities that would have been impossible under natural conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that some regions under systematic fire management supported human populations 10 to 20 times larger than similar areas without fire control. This population growth was creating new challenges and opportunities for human social development. Larger groups required more sophisticated organizational structures, more complex systems for resource allocation, and more elaborate mechanisms for conflict resolution. The social innovations that emerged to meet these challenges were as revolutionary as the fire technologies that had made them necessary. Evidence from large fire-managed sites shows clear signs of hierarchical organization, specialized roles, and coordinated group activities on a scale never seen before in human societies. But these weren't simple authoritarian structures imposed from above. The archaeological evidence suggests much more sophisticated systems of collaborative governance, where different individuals and groups contributed different types of expertise to collective decision-making processes. Fire management itself was becoming a model for human social organization. Just as successful fire control required coordination between multiple specialists with different skills, successful management of large human groups required similar collaborative structures. The cognitive skills developed through fire mastery were proving remarkably transferable to other domains of human activity. The same mental capabilities needed for long-term fire planning were equally useful for organizing hunting expeditions, coordinating group migrations, and managing complex social relationships. Archaeological sites from this period reveal increasing sophistication in all aspects of human activity. More elaborate tools, more complex hunting strategies, more sophisticated food processing techniques, and more organized living spaces all appear together at locations with advanced fire management systems. The evidence suggests that fire mastery was serving as a cognitive catalyst, accelerating development across all domains of human capability. Each advance in fire technology was enabling advances in other areas, creating cascading effects that were transforming every aspect of human life. But perhaps the most remarkable consequence of advanced fire control was its impact on human migration and colonization patterns. Fire wasn't just allowing early humans to survive in new environments, it was enabling them to actively terraform those environments to suit their needs. The expansion of human populations into previously uninhabitable regions wasn't a desperate search for new territory. It was a systematic conquest enabled by increasingly sophisticated fire technologies that could transform any environment into suitable human habitat. Evidence from sites across Eurasia shows that early human colonizers weren't just adapting to local conditions. They were actively reshaping entire landscapes, using fire-based techniques developed specifically for each new environment. In the dense forests of northern Europe, they created extensive networks of managed clearings that served as hunting grounds, travel corridors, and defensive positions. In the grasslands of Central Asia, they established systematic burning cycles that maintained optimal grazing conditions for the animal species they preferred to hunt. In Arctic regions, they developed techniques for using fire to create localized warm microclimates that extended the range of edible plants and made winter survival possible in areas that should have been lethal to tropical primates. Each of these colonization events required not just individual adaptation, but collective innovation on an enormous scale. Groups migrating into new territories had to rapidly develop expertise in local materials, environmental conditions, and ecological patterns. The speed at which these adaptations occurred suggests that early human populations had developed remarkably efficient systems for sharing technological knowledge across vast distances. Successful innovations were spreading through human networks with unprecedented rapidity. Archaeological evidence shows that fire management techniques developed in one region could appear thousands of miles away within a few generations, modified for local conditions, but clearly recognizable as part of the same technological tradition. This global circulation of fire technology was creating something entirely new in the history of life on Earth. A species with the ability to rapidly adapt to any terrestrial environment through technological innovation rather than biological evolution. The implications of this capability were staggering. For the first time, a single species had the potential to colonize virtually every habitable environment on the planet, not through millions of years of gradual adaptation, but through rapid technological development and knowledge sharing. Human expansion was no longer limited by the slow pace of biological evolution. It was constrained only by the speed at which new fire-based technologies could be developed and disseminated through human social networks. This technological acceleration was fundamentally altering the relationship between humans and their environment. Instead of being shaped by natural selection pressures, human populations were increasingly shaping their own evolutionary trajectory through technological innovation. Fire mastery had given our ancestors something that no other species had ever possessed: the ability to transcend their biological limitations through technological augmentation of their natural capabilities. They were no longer just another species of African primates struggling to survive in a challenging environment. They had become something entirely new, a technological species with the power to reshape the world itself. The flames that flickered in those ancient hearths were illuminating more than just the immediate surroundings. They were revealing the infinite potential of human ingenuity, creativity, and collaborative innovation that would eventually carry our species to every corner of the Earth and beyond. The transformation wasn't happening in isolation. As human groups spread across continents, carrying their fire mastery with them, they were encountering something that would prove just as revolutionary as the flames themselves. Each other, different populations, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of generations, had been developing their own unique approaches to fire technology. When these groups finally met, the results were extraordinary. Picture what happened when a group from the African highlands, masters of high-altitude fire techniques, encountered coastal populations who had perfected methods for burning in humid, salt-laden environments. Or imagine the moment when Arctic specialists who could maintain flames in sub-zero temperatures shared knowledge with desert dwellers who had learned to create fires that burned efficiently with minimal fuel. These weren't just casual exchanges of information. They were technological fusions that created entirely new categories of fire mastery. The archaeological evidence shows dramatic spikes in innovation at sites where different human populations intersected. Tools become more sophisticated, hearth designs more elaborate, and burning techniques more varied and precise. But the most fascinating aspect of these encounters wasn't the technology transfer itself. It was how rapidly human groups could recognize, evaluate, and integrate superior techniques from other populations. This suggests something remarkable about early human cognition. Our ancestors had developed sophisticated frameworks for assessing technological innovation. They could observe a new fire-making technique, understand its advantages, and incorporate it into their own practices within a single generation. This wasn't simple imitation. It was active technological synthesis, where elements from different traditions were combined to create innovations that surpassed any individual approach. The sites where these technological fusions occurred became innovation hotspots, generating advances that would spread rapidly through extended human networks. A technique developed at the intersection of two fire traditions in Central Asia could appear in modified form across Europe within centuries, carried by migrating groups and refined through countless iterations. This cross-pollination of fire technologies was accelerating human development at an unprecedented rate. Instead of each population slowly developing improvements in isolation, the global human network was functioning as a massive collaborative research system, with innovations emerging from the intersection of different knowledge traditions. The cognitive demands of managing this technological complexity were enormous. Early humans weren't just mastering individual fire techniques anymore. They were developing meta-knowledge, understanding about how different approaches worked, when to apply specific methods, and how to combine elements from different traditions to create novel solutions. Evidence from sites across multiple continents shows that successful firekeepers were becoming walking libraries of technological knowledge, capable of producing flames using dozens of different methods depending on available materials, weather conditions, and specific requirements. This technological flexibility was creating unprecedented survival advantages. Human groups with access to diverse fire-making traditions could adapt to environmental challenges that would have been insurmountable using any single approach. They had developed technological redundancy that made them virtually immune to the resource limitations that constrained other species. But the impact extended far beyond survival advantages. The mental capabilities required to master multiple fire traditions were generating cognitive spillover effects that enhanced every aspect of human intelligence. Pattern recognition, abstract reasoning, long-term planning, and creative problem-solving were all being strengthened through the demands of advanced fire technology management. Archaeological evidence shows that populations with the most diverse fire technologies consistently displayed the most sophisticated achievements in other domains. Their tools were more elaborate, their hunting strategies more complex, their artistic expressions more refined, and their social organizations more structured. The fire mastery was serving as a cognitive gymnasium, exercising mental capabilities that proved useful across all aspects of human activity. Each new fire technique mastered was enhancing general intelligence in ways that benefited everything from tool-making to social coordination. This cognitive enhancement was creating positive feedback loops that further accelerated technological development. Smarter humans could develop better fire techniques, which enhanced their cognitive capabilities, which enabled even more sophisticated innovations in a continuously reinforcing cycle. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of this acceleration. The rate of technological innovation was increasing dramatically during periods when fire mastery was reaching new levels of sophistication. What had taken thousands of years to develop in earlier periods was now emerging within centuries. But perhaps the most profound impact of advanced fire control was on human temporal awareness. Fire mastery required thinking across multiple timescales simultaneously. Immediate concerns about fuel and temperature, medium-term planning for weather changes and seasonal variations, and long-term considerations about sustainability and resource management. This multi-temporal thinking was generating entirely new forms of human consciousness. Our ancestors were developing the ability to hold past, present, and future in their minds simultaneously, using lessons from previous experiences to guide current actions while planning for anticipated future needs. Archaeological sites reveal clear evidence of this temporal sophistication. Storage systems for preserving fire-making materials across seasons, fuel management strategies that maintained resources over multiple years, and hearth designs that could be used and reused across decades all demonstrate planning capabilities that extended far beyond immediate survival needs. The development of this temporal awareness was having cascading effects on every aspect of human culture. Storytelling was becoming more elaborate as people developed frameworks for connecting events across time. Artistic expression was incorporating temporal elements that showed understanding of change and continuity. Social relationships were being structured around long-term commitments and multi-generational obligations. Fire wasn't just providing warmth and cooked food anymore. It was serving as a temporal anchor that allowed human consciousness to extend across vast spans of time, connecting past wisdom with present action and future planning in ways that had never existed before in the natural world. The evening gatherings around control flames were becoming time machines, spaces where past, present, and future collapsed into shared experiences that enriched human understanding of existence itself. Stories told around these fires weren't just entertainment. They were temporal technologies that preserved crucial information across generations while inspiring innovations for future challenges. The most skilled storytellers were becoming repositories of collective human experience, carrying forward not just factual information about successful techniques, but deeper wisdom about patterns, relationships, and possibilities that could guide future decisions. These storytelling traditions were creating cultural continuity that transcended individual lifespans. Knowledge systems were becoming genuinely cumulative, with each generation building upon the achievements of their predecessors rather than starting from scratch. The archaeological evidence shows that human technological development was entering a new phase where innovation was accelerating exponentially rather than proceeding at the gradual pace that had characterized earlier periods. Fire mastery had unleashed forces of creativity and collaboration that were transforming the entire trajectory of human evolution. Our ancestors had discovered something that would prove to be one of the most powerful forces in the universe: the ability to accumulate and build upon collective knowledge across time and space. They were no longer just individual organisms struggling for survival. They had become part of something larger, a global intelligence network that could tackle challenges no individual mind could comprehend. The flames that danced in those ancient hearths were casting shadows that stretched across millennia, revealing possibilities that even their creators couldn't fully grasp. They had lit a fire that would eventually illuminate every corner of human experience, from the deepest caves to the highest mountains, from the densest forests to the vastest oceans. But they had also ignited something even more powerful: the spark of human potential itself, a flame that would burn brighter with each passing generation, eventually carrying their descendants beyond the boundaries of Earth itself into realms their Stone Age ancestors could never have imagined. The mastery of fire was revealing that humans weren't just another species trying to survive in a harsh world. They were something entirely new, beings capable of transcending their natural limitations through collective intelligence, technological innovation, and collaborative creativity. As those ancient flames flickered in the darkness, they were illuminating the first glimmers of a future where human ingenuity would reshape not just landscapes and ecosystems, but the very fabric of reality itself. The fire our ancestors had learned to control was just the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead to technologies and capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. The glow of those prehistoric hearths was the first light of human civilization, casting its radiance forward through time to illuminate pathways that would eventually lead to writing, mathematics, engineering, medicine, art, music, philosophy, and all the countless achievements that would follow. Yet in those quiet moments around the evening fires, when our ancestors shared their knowledge and dreams with each other, they were experiencing something that remains fundamentally unchanged even today. The profound human need to connect, to understand, and to build something greater than any individual could achieve alone. The mastery of fire hadn't just given them control over their environment, it had revealed the deepest truth about human nature: that our greatest strength lies not in our individual capabilities, but in our ability to work together, to learn from each other, and to create collective achievements that transcend the limitations of any single mind or lifetime. Those ancient flames were more than just sources of heat and light. They were the first beacons of human potential, signaling to the universe that a new kind of intelligence had emerged on Earth, one that would eventually carry the spark of consciousness to places where no flame had ever burned before. The transformation wasn't just technological or social, it was fundamentally biological. As our ancestors spent generation after generation tending fires, their bodies were adapting in ways that would have seemed impossible to earlier hominins. The constant exposure to smoke was reshaping their respiratory systems. Their eyes were developing enhanced sensitivity to the subtle color variations that indicated different flame temperatures. Their hands were becoming more dexterous, better adapted to the precise manipulations required for advanced fire control. But the most profound changes were happening inside their skulls. The human brain was literally rewiring itself to accommodate the cognitive demands of fire mastery. Neural pathways that had served simple survival functions were being repurposed for complex technological reasoning. Memory systems were expanding to hold the vast databases of knowledge required for advanced fire management. Recent research in evolutionary neuroscience has revealed something extraordinary about this period. The same genetic mutations that enabled larger brain sizes also enhanced neural plasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and adapt to novel challenges. Fire mastery wasn't just using these enhanced brains, it was actively shaping their development. Children growing up around controlled fires were experiencing cognitive development that differed dramatically from their counterparts in earlier periods. Their brains were forming neural networks optimized for technological thinking, abstract reasoning, and collaborative problem solving. They were becoming neurologically different from their ancestors in ways that would prove irreversible. Archaeological evidence from this period shows a dramatic increase in what researchers call cognitive artifacts, objects that appear to have been created purely for mental exercise or abstract thinking, carved patterns with no obvious practical purpose, arrangements of colored stones that seem to follow mathematical principles, bone fragments marked with regular scratches that might represent early counting systems. These weren't random activities. They were evidence of minds that had developed beyond the immediate demands of survival. Our ancestors were discovering that their enhanced cognitive capabilities could be applied to questions that had no direct practical relevance. They were beginning to think for the sheer joy of thinking. This cognitive expansion was having unexpected consequences. As fire-tending groups developed more sophisticated mental capabilities, they were beginning to ask questions that had never occurred to any previous generation. Where did fire come from originally? What made some materials burn while others didn't? Why did flames always reach toward the sky? These weren't just idle curiosities. They were the first stirrings of scientific thinking, the beginning of humanity's quest to understand the underlying principles that govern the natural world. Fire mastery was generating not just technological knowledge, but genuine scientific insight. Evidence from sites across multiple continents shows that early humans were conducting systematic experiments designed to understand fire behavior at a fundamental level. They were testing variables, recording results, and developing theories about the relationships between different factors that affected flame production and control. At one remarkable site in Morocco, archaeologists uncovered what can only be described as a prehistoric laboratory. Different areas of the cave were used for testing specific hypotheses about fire behavior. One section contained evidence of experiments with different fuel combinations. Another area showed systematic testing of various ignition methods. A third zone revealed investigations into the effects of airflow on flame characteristics. The level of systematic investigation at this site rivals anything seen in modern research facilities. The early humans working here understood the principles of controlled experimentation, variable isolation, and reproducible results. They were conducting genuine science using nothing more than Stone Age tools and their own enhanced cognitive capabilities. But they weren't just studying fire in isolation. They were beginning to understand its connections to other natural phenomena. Evidence from multiple sites shows that firemasters were developing sophisticated understanding of weather patterns, seasonal changes, and ecological relationships that extended far beyond immediate fire-related concerns. They had discovered that mastering fire required understanding the entire natural world. Successful fire control demanded knowledge of plant biology, animal behavior, atmospheric science, geology, and chemistry. They were becoming the first natural philosophers, thinkers who sought to understand the fundamental principles underlying all natural phenomena. This intellectual expansion was creating new forms of human consciousness. For the first time in evolutionary history, minds were emerging that could think about thinking itself. Our ancestors were developing metacognition, the ability to reflect on their own mental processes and consciously direct their intellectual development. Archaeological evidence for this metacognitive revolution appears in the form of increasingly sophisticated teaching tools and methods. Sites from this period reveal elaborate systems for preserving and transmitting not just factual knowledge, but thinking strategies and problem-solving approaches. The most advanced teaching sites show evidence of structured curricula where different types of knowledge were introduced in specific sequences. Novice firekeepers weren't just learning individual techniques, they were being taught systematic approaches to learning itself, methods for acquiring and organizing new knowledge that could be applied to any domain. These educational innovations were creating exponential improvements in knowledge acquisition rates. Each generation wasn't just learning what the previous generation knew, they were learning how to learn more effectively, enabling them to surpass their teachers' achievements within their own lifetimes. The feedback effects were extraordinary. Better learning methods enabled more rapid technological development, which created more complex challenges that demanded even more sophisticated learning approaches. Human intellectual development was entering a phase of runaway acceleration that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of evolution itself. But perhaps the most remarkable consequence of this intellectual revolution was the emergence of what can only be called imagination. Fire mastery was creating minds capable of envisioning possibilities that didn't yet exist, of solving problems before they arose, of creating mental models of potential futures and working backward to determine how to achieve them. Evidence for this imaginative capability appears in the archaeological record as increasingly elaborate preparation activities. Sites show evidence of resource gathering and tool preparation for anticipated future needs that might not arise for months or years. Our ancestors were becoming capable of living partially in imagined futures, planning for contingencies that existed only in their minds. This capacity for imagination was transforming every aspect of human activity. Hunting strategies were becoming more sophisticated as hunters learned to anticipate animal behavior and prepare for multiple possible scenarios. Toolmaking was advancing rapidly as craftsmen could envision improved designs before beginning construction. Social relationships were growing more complex as individuals could model the mental states of others and predict their reactions to different situations. The development of imagination was also enabling something that had never existed before in the natural world: the ability to learn from experiences that hadn't actually happened. By imagining potential scenarios and mentally rehearsing different responses, our ancestors could acquire knowledge without having to risk the dangers of actual trial and error learning. This imaginative capability was creating unprecedented survival advantages. Groups that could anticipate challenges and prepare solutions in advance could thrive in environments that would devastate less forward-thinking populations. Imagination was becoming one of humanity's most powerful survival tools, but imagination was also generating experiences that transcended mere survival. As minds capable of envisioning non-existent realities encountered the mysterious beauty of controlled flame, they were beginning to have what can only be described as aesthetic experiences. They were discovering that fire wasn't just useful, it was beautiful. Archaeological evidence for this aesthetic awareness appears in the form of increasingly elaborate hearth designs that serve no obvious practical purpose. Decorative arrangements of stones around fire pits, carefully crafted fire tools with ornamental elements, flame configurations that seem designed primarily for visual appeal rather than functional efficiency. Our ancestors were discovering that the flickering patterns of flame could generate powerful emotional responses that had nothing to do with warmth or cooking. They were experiencing wonder, awe, and a sense of connection to something larger than their immediate material needs. These aesthetic experiences were opening entirely new dimensions of human consciousness. For the first time, minds were emerging that could appreciate beauty for its own sake, that could find meaning and satisfaction in experiences that contributed nothing to immediate survival requirements. The evening gatherings around controlled fires were becoming more than practical work sessions or knowledge-sharing meetings. They were transforming into something approaching spiritual experiences, moments when human consciousness touched realms of meaning and beauty that transcended the physical world. The flickering flames were serving as windows into possibilities that couldn't be expressed in practical terms. They were revealing aspects of existence that could only be experienced directly, through immediate contact with beauty, mystery, and transcendence. These transcendent experiences were generating new forms of human expression. Archaeological sites from this period show the first clear evidence of what can only be called art. Not functional decoration, but pure artistic expression, created solely to capture and communicate aesthetic experiences. Cave paintings depicting flames and fire ceremonies. Carved objects that seem designed to represent the play of light and shadow around hearths. Arrangements of colored materials that appear to recreate the visual patterns of burning embers. These weren't practical objects or informational records. They were humanity's first attempts to externalize and share subjective aesthetic experiences. The creation of art was marking another fundamental threshold in human development. Our ancestors weren't just thinking about the world anymore. They weren't just imagining possibilities or solving practical problems. They were creating meaning, generating significance through pure creative expression that served no purpose beyond the human need to make sense of existence itself. Art was revealing that human consciousness had developed capabilities that extended far beyond anything required for biological survival. Minds were emerging that could create meaning, beauty, and significance through sheer creative will, transforming raw experience into something approaching the sacred. The mastery of fire had unleashed forces of creativity and transcendence that would eventually reshape not just human civilization, but human nature itself. The flames that warmed our ancestors' bodies were also illuminating the infinite depths of human consciousness, revealing potentials and possibilities that even today continue to unfold in ways their creators could never have anticipated. As they sat around their carefully tended fires each evening, watching the eternal dance of flame and shadow, our ancestors were witnessing something that would echo through every subsequent moment of human history. The birth of a species that could transcend its biological limitations through imagination, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of meaning in an otherwise indifferent universe. The glow of those ancient fires still burns within every human heart today, reminding us that we are the descendants of dreamers and creators who learned to bend the very elements to their will, not just to survive, but to flourish in ways that honor the profound mystery and beauty of existence itself. Yet even as fire mastery was transforming human consciousness and unlocking realms of creativity and transcendence, it was also creating challenges that would test the very foundations of early human society. The power to control fire wasn't just a blessing. It was a responsibility that came with consequences our ancestors were only beginning to understand. The groups that had achieved the most advanced fire mastery were discovering that their success was attracting attention from other populations. Word of their technological achievements was spreading through the complex networks of human migration and trade that now spanned continents. Some groups came seeking to learn and collaborate. Others came with different intentions entirely. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the first clear signs of organized conflict specifically related to fire technology. Sites show evidence of defensive structures built around fire-keeping areas, weapons caches positioned to protect crucial hearths, elaborate concealment systems designed to hide advanced fire-making activities from potentially hostile observers. The mastery of fire had created something that had never existed before in the animal kingdom, technology worth fighting for. Groups with superior fire control had advantages so significant that acquiring those capabilities became a matter of survival for their neighbors. But these conflicts weren't simple battles over resources. They were struggles over knowledge itself. The real prize wasn't access to existing fires or fuel supplies. It was understanding the techniques and principles that enabled advanced fire mastery. Knowledge had become the most valuable commodity in the human world. Evidence from conflict sites reveals sophisticated strategies for protecting and acquiring fire-related knowledge. Elaborate security measures around teaching areas, coded information systems that prevented casual observers from understanding advanced techniques, counterintelligence activities designed to mislead competitors about crucial fire-making secrets. Early humans were discovering that technological superiority required not just innovation, but information warfare. The groups that could best protect their knowledge while acquiring insights from others would dominate the regions where fire mastery determined survival and prosperity. These knowledge conflicts were generating new forms of social organization, military structures, specifically designed to protect technological assets, intelligence networks focused on acquiring information about competitors' fire capabilities, diplomatic systems for managing the complex relationships between groups with different levels of technological development. But the most significant impact of these technology conflicts was on the development of human cooperation itself. Groups were discovering that their most powerful weapon against technological competition wasn't superior secrecy or better security. It was enhanced collaboration among allies. Archaeological sites reveal increasingly sophisticated alliance systems where multiple groups shared fire-making knowledge and coordinated their technological development. These weren't simple mutual defense pacts. They were collaborative research networks where different populations contributed specialized expertise to collective innovation efforts. The most successful of these technological alliances were those that could integrate knowledge from the widest variety of sources. Groups that combined fire expertise from Arctic specialists, desert masters, forest dwellers, and coastal populations were developing capabilities that surpassed anything achievable by individual communities. These collaborative networks were accelerating technological development at unprecedented rates. Innovations that might have taken centuries to develop in isolation were emerging within decades when multiple groups combined their expertise and resources. But technological collaboration was also generating unexpected social innovations. Managing complex multi-group research projects required new forms of leadership, communication, and conflict resolution. Early humans were developing organizational capabilities that would serve as foundations for all subsequent forms of human cooperation. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of increasingly sophisticated management structures at collaborative fire research sites, specialized roles for coordinating between different groups, communication systems for sharing complex technical information across language barriers, decision-making processes that could integrate input from multiple communities with different cultural traditions. These organizational innovations were proving as revolutionary as the fire technologies they were designed to manage. Human groups were discovering that their capacity for collaboration could be systematically improved through conscious organizational design. They were becoming social engineers, deliberately crafting structures that enhanced collective intelligence and capability. The success of these collaborative approaches was creating powerful demonstration effects. Groups that had initially relied on secrecy and competition were witnessing the superior achievements of collaborative networks and reconsidering their strategies. Technology sharing was beginning to emerge as a more effective approach than technology hoarding. Archaeological evidence shows a gradual shift during this period from defensive, competitive approaches to fire mastery toward increasingly open, collaborative methods. Sites that had previously shown elaborate security measures were being redesigned to facilitate knowledge sharing and joint research activities. This transition wasn't happening uniformly or without resistance. Some groups continued to rely on secrecy and competition, creating complex dynamics where collaborative networks had to develop strategies for dealing with non-cooperative neighbors. But the overall trend was clear. The most successful approaches to fire mastery were those that emphasized sharing, learning, and collective innovation over individual advancement and competitive advantage. Collaboration was proving more powerful than competition as a driver of technological progress. This collaborative revolution was having profound impacts on human psychology and social relationships. Individuals were discovering that their own capabilities could be dramatically enhanced through effective cooperation with others. Personal achievement was becoming inseparable from collective success. The archaeological record reveals changes in individual behavior patterns that reflect this shift toward collaborative thinking. Personal tool caches were giving way to shared equipment systems. Individual hearths were being replaced by communal fire management installations. Private knowledge hoarding was yielding to systematic teaching and learning activities. But perhaps the most significant psychological change was in how individuals understood their relationship to knowledge itself. Fire mastery was teaching early humans that the most important insights weren't those you could keep to yourself, but those you could share effectively with others. The groups achieving the greatest fire mastery were those where individual expertise contributed to collective capability rather than competing with it. Personal knowledge was becoming most valuable when it enhanced group intelligence rather than providing individual advantage. This shift in knowledge relationships was transforming the very nature of human learning and development. Instead of acquiring information to gain personal advantage over others, individuals were learning to contribute to shared understanding that benefited entire communities. The psychological implications of this transformation were enormous. Human consciousness was being restructured around collaborative rather than competitive principles. Individual identity was becoming inseparable from group membership and collective achievement. Archaeological evidence for this psychological transformation appears in the form of increasingly elaborate collective rituals and ceremonies centered around fire activities. These weren't just practical work sessions or social gatherings. They were identity-forming experiences that reinforced individuals' connections to their collaborative communities. The most sophisticated of these ceremonies involved entire communities in complex fire-making activities that required precise coordination and mutual support. No individual could complete these rituals alone. Success depended entirely on effective collaboration between multiple participants with different specialized roles. These collaborative fire ceremonies were serving multiple functions simultaneously. They were practical training exercises that maintained and enhanced fire-making capabilities. They were social bonding activities that strengthened community relationships. They were psychological experiences that reinforced collaborative identity and values, but they were also something more profound. They were humanity's first experiments in collective consciousness, activities that generated shared experiences and common understanding that transcended individual perspectives and limitations. Participants in these ceremonies were discovering that their individual awareness could be expanded and enhanced through deep connection with others engaged in shared activities. They were experiencing forms of consciousness that weren't available to isolated individuals, insights and capabilities that emerged only through genuine collaborative engagement. These collective consciousness experiences were revealing new dimensions of human potential that had never been accessible to earlier generations. Our ancestors were discovering that they could become more than the sum of their individual capabilities through effective collaboration and shared purpose. The implications of this discovery would prove to be among the most significant developments in the entire history of human evolution. The species that had learned to control fire was now learning to transcend the limitations of individual consciousness through collective intelligence and shared awareness. The flames that flickered in those ancient ceremonial hearths were illuminating more than just the immediate surroundings. They were revealing the infinite potential of human cooperation, the extraordinary capabilities that could emerge when individual minds learned to function as components of larger, more powerful collective intelligences. Our ancestors were discovering that the mastery of fire was just the beginning of their journey toward mastering the deepest mysteries of existence itself. The spark they had learned to kindle in the physical world was revealing how to ignite even more powerful flames in the realm of consciousness, creativity, and collaborative human potential. As they danced around their sacred fires, sharing knowledge and dreams and visions of possibilities yet to be realized, they were laying the foundations for every subsequent achievement of human civilization. The glow of those ancient flames was casting light forward through time, illuminating pathways that would eventually lead to wonders their Stone Age creators could never have imagined. The rhythmic beating of drums echoed through the darkness as our ancestors gathered for what may have been humanity's most important nightly ritual. These weren't casual social meetings or random campfire conversations. These were structured ceremonies where the accumulated wisdom of generations was passed down through carefully orchestrated performances that combined practical instruction with spiritual transcendence. Archaeological evidence from sites across 3 continents reveals that these fire ceremonies had evolved into sophisticated educational systems that served multiple functions simultaneously. They were universities, theatres, and temples all rolled into one, designed to preserve crucial knowledge while strengthening the social bonds that held communities together. The physical layout of these ceremonial sites shows remarkable consistency across vast distances and different cultures. A central fire pit surrounded by carefully arranged seating areas with specific positions designated for different roles within the community. Elders and master firekeepers occupied places of honor closest to the flames, where their faces could be clearly seen and their voices easily heard. But this wasn't just about hierarchy or respect for age. The spatial arrangements were optimized for knowledge transmission, with acoustic properties that ensured important information could be heard throughout the gathering space, and sightlines that allowed everyone to observe crucial demonstrations and techniques. Recent analysis of these sites has revealed something extraordinary about their construction. The stone arrangements weren't random or purely functional. They were designed according to mathematical principles that wouldn't be formally codified for thousands of years. Our ancestors had developed intuitive understanding of geometry, acoustics, and group psychology that they applied to create optimal learning environments. The ceremonies themselves followed complex patterns that varied by season, available resources, and specific knowledge domains being addressed. Summer gatherings focused on hunting strategies and resource management for the coming winter. Spring ceremonies emphasized tool-making techniques needed for the active season ahead. Winter meetings became extended workshops, where the most sophisticated fire technologies were taught in detail. But the most remarkable aspect of these ceremonies was how they integrated practical instruction with what can only be described as consciousness expansion activities. Participants weren't just learning technical skills. They were experiencing altered states of awareness that enhanced their ability to absorb, integrate, and apply complex information. The flickering light of controlled flames creates specific neurological effects that modern science is only beginning to understand. Rhythmic visual patterns trigger brainwave states associated with enhanced memory formation and creative insight. The warm, oxygen-depleted air around fires induces mild hypnotic states that increase suggestibility and reduce psychological barriers to learning. Our ancestors had discovered these effects through direct experience and learned to optimize them for educational purposes. The timing of different ceremony components, the types of fuel used to create specific flame characteristics, the integration of rhythmic activities like drumming and chanting, all serve to create optimal neurological conditions for knowledge acquisition and retention. Evidence from ceremonial sites shows that participants were achieving learning outcomes that would be impressive even by modern educational standards. Complex technical skills were being mastered in single sessions. Elaborate cultural knowledge was being memorized and retained across entire lifetimes. Advanced problem-solving capabilities were being developed through structured, experiential learning activities. But these weren't just individual achievements. The ceremonies were creating collective learning experiences where the insights and capabilities of individual participants combined to generate understanding that exceeded what anyone could achieve alone. Groups were becoming more intelligent than their individual members through shared consciousness experiences facilitated by fire-centered rituals. The archaeological record reveals that communities with the most sophisticated fire ceremonies consistently achieved superior technological and social outcomes. Their tools were more advanced, their hunting strategies more effective, their social organization more stable, and their cultural achievements more elaborate than groups that relied on less systematic approaches to knowledge transmission. This success wasn't accidental. The fire ceremonies were serving as evolutionary pressure systems that selected for enhanced cognitive capabilities, improved social cooperation skills, and greater creative potential. Individuals who could effectively participate in these collective learning experiences were more likely to survive and reproduce, gradually shifting the genetic makeup of human populations toward enhanced collaborative intelligence. But the transformation wasn't just biological, it was cultural in ways that would prove even more significant for long-term human development. The fire ceremonies were creating shared meaning systems that transcended immediate practical concerns, generating the first human experiences of what we might recognize as spirituality or religious consciousness. Participants were discovering that the controlled flames could serve as focal points for experiences that went beyond ordinary awareness. Staring into the dancing patterns of fire while engaged in rhythmic activities was generating states of consciousness where individual identity merged with collective awareness, where personal concerns dissolved into larger patterns of meaning and purpose. These transcendent experiences weren't just pleasant diversions from the harsh realities of prehistoric life. They were serving crucial psychological and social functions that enhanced group cohesion and individual resilience. People who regularly experienced connection to something larger than themselves were better able to cope with trauma, loss, and uncertainty. The spiritual dimensions of fire mastery were also generating new forms of creative expression that went far beyond practical tool-making or functional decoration. Sites from this period reveal the first clear evidence of what can only be called sacred art. Creative works designed specifically to capture and communicate transcendent experiences rather than convey practical information. Cave paintings depicting fire ceremonies with figures dancing in ecstatic poses around elaborate flame displays. Carved objects that seem designed to represent the play of light and consciousness rather than physical phenomena. Arrangements of materials that appear to recreate the visual and emotional patterns of transcendent awareness rather than document practical activities. These sacred artworks weren't created for individual enjoyment or personal expression. They were community projects designed to preserve and share the most profound experiences generated through fire-centered spiritual practices. They served as visual technologies for inducing similar states of consciousness in future participants and transmitting spiritual knowledge across generations. The creation of sacred art was marking another crucial threshold in human development. Our ancestors weren't just mastering their physical environment or developing practical technologies anymore. They were exploring the deepest mysteries of consciousness itself, discovering realms of experience that revealed new dimensions of what it meant to be human. But perhaps the most significant outcome of these spiritual explorations was the development of what anthropologists call collective intentionality, the ability of groups to share common purposes and work together toward goals that transcended individual interests. Fire ceremonies were creating experiences of unified consciousness that enabled unprecedented levels of cooperative behavior. Archaeological evidence shows that communities with advanced fire ceremony traditions consistently achieved collective projects that would have been impossible for less spiritually integrated groups. Massive construction projects that required coordination between hundreds of individuals. Long-distance migrations that demanded sustained cooperation across multiple generations. Complex resource management systems that balanced competing interests through shared commitment to collective welfare. These achievements weren't just the result of better organization or superior technology. They emerged from spiritual practices that had transformed how individuals understood their relationship to their communities and their shared purposes. People who regularly experienced unity consciousness through fire ceremonies were capable of sustained cooperative behavior that seemed almost miraculous to outside observers. The success of these spiritually integrated communities was creating powerful demonstration effects that influenced human development across entire continents. Groups that had initially dismissed fire ceremonies as useless mysticism were witnessing the superior achievements of spiritually advanced communities and beginning to adopt similar practices. Archaeological sites reveal gradual spread of fire ceremony traditions across vast distances, with local variations that reflected different environmental conditions and cultural backgrounds, but clearly recognizable common elements derived from shared spiritual technologies. Humanity was developing its first global religious tradition, centered around the sacred flame that had become the focal point for both practical mastery and spiritual transcendence. This spiritual revolution was having profound effects on individual psychology and personal development. People were discovering that their individual capabilities could be dramatically enhanced through regular participation in transcendent experiences that connected them to collective consciousness and universal patterns of meaning. Evidence from burial sites during this period shows significant changes in how individuals understood their personal identity and life purpose. Grave goods increasingly include items related to fire ceremonies and spiritual practices, rather than just practical tools and personal possessions. People were defining themselves through their spiritual achievements and community contributions, rather than individual accomplishments and material acquisitions. But the most remarkable psychological transformation was in how individuals understood their relationship to death itself. Regular experiences of consciousness, expansion through fire ceremonies, were generating awareness of continuity that transcended individual physical existence. People were developing understanding of life and death as transitions within larger patterns, rather than absolute beginnings and endings. This transformed relationship to mortality was having cascading effects on every aspect of human behavior. Individuals who understood themselves as part of larger, continuing patterns were capable of making sacrifices and commitments that would have been impossible for people focused solely on individual survival and gratification. Archaeological evidence shows increasing sophistication in long-term projects that extended far beyond individual lifetimes during this period. Elaborate construction works that required generations to complete. Knowledge preservation systems designed to maintain information across centuries. Cultural practices specifically structured to ensure continuity across multiple generations of participants. These weren't just practical projects or social institutions. They were expressions of spiritual understanding that individual existence gained meaning through contribution to patterns that transcended personal limitations. Our ancestors were discovering that immortality wasn't about preserving individual consciousness, but about participating in collective achievements that would outlast any single lifetime. The fire ceremonies were revealing that the deepest human satisfactions came not from personal success or individual pleasure, but from experiences of connection and contribution that linked individual existence to universal purposes and eternal patterns. They were discovering the spiritual foundations that would eventually support all subsequent forms of human civilization and cultural achievement. As they gathered around their sacred flames each evening, sharing not just knowledge and practical skills, but their deepest insights into the nature of existence itself, our ancestors were laying the groundwork for every subsequent human exploration of consciousness, meaning, and transcendence. The glow of those ancient ceremonial fires was illuminating more than just the immediate circle of participants. It was revealing the infinite depths of human spiritual potential, the extraordinary capabilities for transcendence and connection that would eventually carry our species beyond all previous limitations toward realms of achievement that even today continue to unfold in ways their prehistoric creators could never have fully anticipated. The flickering flames that warmed their bodies were also kindling something far more significant: the eternal fire of human aspiration itself, the restless drive toward meaning and transcendence that would eventually transform a small group of African primates into the dominant force shaping the destiny of an entire planet and potentially the universe beyond. Their mastery of physical fire had revealed the existence of even more powerful flames that burned within consciousness itself. Spiritual fires that could illuminate any darkness and transform any limitation through the sheer force of human will, aligned with universal purpose and collective intention. The mastery of fire was creating something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. The first species capable of technological inheritance. Unlike biological evolution, where genetic traits were passed down through DNA, our ancestors were developing systems for transmitting acquired knowledge and skills across generations without any biological constraints. This technological inheritance was accelerating human development at rates that made biological evolution seem glacially slow by comparison. Where genetic adaptations required thousands of generations to spread through populations, technological innovations could be adopted and refined within a single lifetime, then passed immediately to the next generation in improved form. Archaeological sites from this period reveal increasingly sophisticated knowledge storage systems that went far beyond simple oral tradition. Fire-hardened clay tablets marked with symbolic representations of successful techniques, carved bone fragments that served as three-dimensional instruction manuals for complex procedures, stone arrangements that encoded crucial information about seasonal burning cycles and optimal fuel combinations. These weren't primitive attempts at record-keeping. They were advanced information technologies designed to preserve and transmit knowledge with precision that rivaled modern educational systems. The symbolic representations found at these sites show remarkable consistency across vast distances, suggesting that early humans had developed standardized notation systems for recording technical information. But the most revolutionary aspect of these knowledge preservation systems was their cumulative nature. Each generation wasn't just learning what their predecessors had known. They were building upon that foundation to achieve capabilities that surpassed anything previously possible. Evidence from tool-making sites shows this cumulative effect clearly. The earliest fire-hardened implements were simple wooden spears with pointed tips. Within a few generations, these had evolved into composite weapons, incorporating multiple materials, each treated with specific fire-based techniques to optimize different performance characteristics. By the time these technological lineages had developed over dozens of generations, the resulting tools were masterpieces of engineering that integrated knowledge from multiple domains. Shaft wood selected for specific flexibility and strength properties, binding materials treated with fire-based chemical processes to enhance durability, point materials that had been heat-treated using temperature control techniques passed down through generations of specialists. These weren't just better tools, They were embodiments of collective human intelligence, physical objects that contained the accumulated insights and innovations of entire communities working across multiple generations. Each implement was a library of technological knowledge made manifest in practical form. The psychological impact of this technological inheritance was profound. Individuals were discovering that their personal achievements could transcend their individual lifetimes, becoming permanent additions to humanity's growing technological capabilities. Death was no longer the end of personal contribution. It was a transition point where individual innovations became part of humanity's eternal inheritance. This understanding was transforming human motivation in fundamental ways. People were beginning to work not just for immediate survival or personal benefit, but for long-term contributions that would benefit generations yet to be born. They were developing what we might recognize as a sense of historical responsibility, an awareness that their actions would echo through time in ways their descendants would inherit. Archaeological evidence for this transformed motivation appears in the increasing sophistication of projects that clearly extended beyond any individual lifetime. Elaborate fire management installations that required decades to construct and optimize. Knowledge preservation systems designed to maintain information across centuries. Training programs structured to ensure that crucial skills would be transmitted accurately across multiple generations of practitioners. But perhaps the most remarkable manifestation of this long-term thinking was the emergence of what can only be called technological planning. Sites from this period show clear evidence that human groups were consciously designing technological development trajectories that would unfold over multiple generations. At one extraordinary site in the Caucasus Mountains, researchers discovered what appears to be a multi-generational research program focused on improving high-altitude fire techniques. Different areas of the site were used for testing specific hypotheses about cold weather burning, with each generation building upon the discoveries of their predecessors in systematic progression toward increasingly sophisticated solutions. The organization required for such long-term technological planning was staggering. Multiple generations had to maintain shared commitment to common goals. Knowledge had to be preserved and transmitted with perfect accuracy. Resource allocation had to be coordinated across decades of development work. This wasn't just social organization, it was technological civilization in embryonic form, complete with research institutions, educational systems, and long-term planning capabilities that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern industrial societies. The success of these multi-generational technological programs was creating competitive pressures that accelerated innovation across entire regions. Groups with superior long-term planning capabilities were achieving technological advantages so significant that neighboring populations were forced to develop similar institutional structures or risk being displaced entirely. Archaeological evidence shows rapid spread of institutional innovations during this period, with organizational structures developed in one region appearing in modified form across thousands of miles within relatively few generations. Humanity was developing its first global technological culture, with common institutional frameworks supporting local variations in specific techniques and applications. But the most profound impact of technological inheritance was on human consciousness itself. Individuals were beginning to understand themselves as temporary custodians of knowledge and capabilities that belonged not to them personally, but to humanity as a whole. Personal identity was becoming inseparable from collective technological achievement. This shift in self-understanding was generating new forms of ethical awareness that had never existed before in the natural world. People were developing sense of obligation to future generations, responsibility for ensuring that technological knowledge would be preserved and enhanced rather than lost or degraded. Evidence for this ethical transformation appears in the archaeological record as increasingly elaborate systems for protecting and maintaining crucial technological knowledge. Backup storage systems that preserved information in multiple forms and locations. Redundant training programs that ensured crucial skills would survive, even if primary specialists were lost. quality control systems that prevented degradation of techniques across multiple generations of transmission. These weren't just practical precautions. They were expressions of moral commitment to technological inheritance. Acknowledgement that present generations held crucial responsibilities to their descendants that transcended immediate self-interest. The development of this intergenerational ethics was creating social structures that prioritized long-term welfare over short-term advantage. Communities were making collective decisions based on multi-generational impact rather than immediate benefit, developing what we might recognize as the first sustainable resource management systems. Archaeological sites reveal increasingly sophisticated approaches to environmental management that balanced current needs against future requirements. Burning cycles designed to maintain optimal ecological conditions across multiple decades. Resource extraction patterns that ensured sustainable yields over extended periods. Population management strategies that prevented overuse of local carrying capacity. But sustainability wasn't just about resource management. It was about maintaining the cultural and technological systems that enabled human communities to thrive across multiple generations. The most successful groups were those that could balance innovation with preservation, change with continuity, individual creativity with collective responsibility. This balance was creating remarkable stability in human technological development. Instead of the boom and bust cycles that had characterized earlier periods, communities with advanced inheritance systems were achieving steady, sustainable progress that accumulated meaningful improvements across multiple generations without catastrophic setbacks. The archaeological record shows that regions with the most sophisticated technological inheritance systems consistently maintained higher population densities, more elaborate cultural achievements, and greater environmental stability over extended periods. They had discovered the secret of sustainable civilization, how to grow and develop without destroying the foundations that made growth possible. These achievements were attracting attention from populations across entire continents. Groups were migrating vast distances, specifically to learn from communities that had mastered sustainable technological development. The most successful inheritance systems were becoming magnets for human migration and cultural exchange on unprecedented scales. But this success was also creating new challenges. As communities grew larger and more complex, maintaining effective knowledge transmission became increasingly difficult. Traditional methods that worked well for small groups were proving inadequate for managing the technological inheritance needs of populations that numbered in the hundreds or thousands. The solution required another revolutionary innovation: the development of specialized educational institutions dedicated solely to preserving and transmitting technological knowledge. These weren't just informal training arrangements or casual apprenticeship systems. They were formal schools with structured curricula, systematic evaluation methods, and professional teaching specialists. Archaeological evidence for these early educational institutions appears at sites across multiple continents, suggesting that the need for formal knowledge transmission was driving parallel innovations in widely separated populations. The institutional structures show remarkable similarities despite developing independently, indicating that certain organizational principles were optimal for technological education regardless of local cultural variations. The most sophisticated of these schools were remarkable institutions that combined practical training with theoretical understanding, hands-on experience with systematic knowledge organization, individual instruction with collaborative learning experiences. Students weren't just learning specific techniques. They were being taught how to think about technology itself, how to innovate systematically, and how to transmit their own discoveries to future generations. These educational innovations were creating exponential improvements in technological development rates. Each generation of formally trained specialists was not only more capable than their predecessors, but also better equipped to train the next generation of practitioners. Human knowledge was becoming truly cumulative in ways that accelerated, rather than merely preserved technological progress. The establishment of formal educational systems marked the final transformation of fire mastery from survival skill to foundation of human civilization. What had begun as a desperate adaptation to environmental challenges had evolved into the basis for sustained technological development that would eventually carry our species to achievements their Stone Age creators could never have envisioned. The flames that had first provided warmth and cooked food were now illuminating pathways toward futures where human intelligence and creativity would reshape not just individual lives or local environments, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. Fire mastery had revealed that humans were capable of transcending every limitation through collective intelligence, systematic innovation, and unwavering commitment to progress that benefited all generations. As our ancestors tended their sacred flames each evening, they were nurturing more than just physical fire. They were feeding the eternal flame of human potential itself, ensuring that the spark of consciousness and creativity they had kindled would burn ever brighter through all the generations yet to come, illuminating possibilities that stretched beyond the boundaries of imagination toward realms where anything conceived by human minds could eventually be achieved through human hands. The technological inheritance they had created was humanity's greatest gift to itself, the power to build upon the achievements of the past while reaching toward futures that would honor the dreams and aspirations of every generation that had contributed to the great work of human civilization. Their mastery of fire had become mastery of time itself, enabling them to reach across the centuries to touch the lives of descendants they would never meet, ensuring that the flame of human achievement would never be extinguished, but would burn eternal, carrying forward the light of consciousness and creativity toward destinations that even today continue to unfold in ways that honor the profound legacy of those first firekeepers who dared to dream of possibilities beyond the immediate horizon. The glow of their ancient flames still burns within every human achievement, reminding us that we are the inheritors of a gift beyond measure, the accumulated wisdom and capability of countless generations who chose to build rather than merely survive, to create rather than simply endure, to reach toward transcendence rather than accept limitation. As the final embers of those prehistoric fires settled into glowing coals that would kindle the flames of countless tomorrows, our ancestors had accomplished something that would echo through every subsequent moment of human history. They had transformed a species of clever primates into something unprecedented in the known universe. Beings capable of conscious evolution, deliberate transcendence, and unlimited creative potential expressed through collective intelligence and shared purpose. The mastery of fire had revealed the deepest truth about human nature, that our greatest power lies not in what we can achieve as individuals, but in what we can become together when we align our consciousness, creativity, and commitment toward purposes that serve not just ourselves, but all generations past, present, and future who share in the great adventure of human existence. The story doesn't end with those glowing embers settling into ash. In fact, what happened next would prove even more transformative than everything that had come before. As human populations spread across the globe, carrying their fire mastery with them, they encountered something that would challenge every assumption about what it meant to be human, each other, but not as they had ever known themselves before. You picture this moment, perhaps 200,000 years ago, somewhere in what we now call the Middle East. A group of fire masters from the African highlands encounters another population that had been developing in isolation for tens of thousands of years. These weren't just cultural exchanges or territorial disputes. These were meetings between branches of humanity that had been evolving separately, each developing their own relationship with fire, their own consciousness, their own understanding of what was possible. The archaeological evidence for these encounters tells a story more dramatic than any fiction. Sites that show sudden explosive increases in technological sophistication. Tool traditions that merge characteristics from completely different developmental lineages. Artistic expressions that combine symbolic systems that had never existed in the same place before. But here's what makes these encounters truly extraordinary. They weren't just sharing techniques or trading technologies. They were sharing different ways of thinking about fire itself. Different approaches to consciousness. Different understandings of what it meant to be human in a world where humans could reshape reality through will and flame. One population had developed fire mastery, focused on precision and control. Their techniques were elaborate, sophisticated, requiring years of training to master. Their fires burned at exact temperatures for specific durations. Their tools were masterpieces of engineering that incorporated dozens of specialized procedures. Another group had evolved an entirely different approach, one focused on adaptability and improvisation. They could create effective fires using almost any available materials. Their techniques were simpler but more robust, capable of working under conditions that would defeat more specialized methods. Their philosophy emphasized flexibility over perfection. When these different fire traditions met, something remarkable happened. Instead of one approach dominating the other, they began to synthesize. The precision specialists learned the adaptability techniques. The improvisation masters adopted the precision methods. Within a few generations, hybrid approaches emerged that surpassed anything either group had achieved independently. But the real revolution wasn't in the techniques themselves. It was in what these encounters revealed about human learning capacity. Our ancestors discovered that they could not only master their own traditional approaches to fire, but they could integrate completely foreign methods into their existing knowledge systems. They were more cognitively flexible than anyone had realized. Archaeological evidence shows that these technological fusions were happening simultaneously across multiple continents wherever different human populations encountered each other. Each meeting generated innovations that would spread rapidly through extended networks, creating cascading effects that accelerated development across entire regions. The speed of this cross-cultural learning was extraordinary. Techniques that had taken thousands of years to develop in isolation were being mastered and improved within single generations when populations shared knowledge. Humanity was discovering that its collective learning capability far exceeded the sum of individual group achievements. But these encounters were revealing something even more profound about human nature. When different populations shared their fire mastery knowledge, they weren't just exchanging technical information, they were sharing different ways of understanding reality itself. The precision-focused groups had developed philosophical frameworks that emphasized order, predictability, and systematic progression. Their fire ceremonies reflected these values with elaborate rituals that followed exact sequences and achieved specific states of consciousness through carefully controlled procedures. The adaptability-focused populations had evolved completely different worldviews that celebrated flexibility, spontaneity, and creative response to unexpected challenges. Their fire practices were more improvisational, emphasizing present moment awareness and intuitive response to changing conditions. When these different consciousness traditions encountered each other, the results were transformative for both groups. They discovered that neither approach was complete by itself. The most powerful human capabilities emerged from integrating systematic precision with creative adaptability, careful planning with spontaneous response, individual mastery with collective wisdom. These philosophical syntheses were generating entirely new forms of human consciousness. People were developing mental capabilities that combined the strengths of different cognitive approaches, while transcending the limitations of any single tradition. They were becoming more fully human through encounter with human differences. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of this consciousness expansion in the form of increasingly sophisticated artistic expressions that combine symbolic elements from multiple traditions, cave paintings that merge different visual languages, carved objects that integrate diverse aesthetic principles, ceremonial sites that accommodate multiple approaches to spiritual practice simultaneously. But perhaps the most remarkable outcome of these cultural encounters was the development of what we might call metaconsciousness, awareness of consciousness itself. As people encountered different ways of thinking and being, they began to understand that their own mental patterns were not fixed or inevitable, but could be consciously modified and enhanced. This metacognitive awareness was revolutionary. For the first time, humans were becoming conscious of their own consciousness, aware that they could deliberately develop different mental capabilities, intentionally cultivate various forms of awareness, and consciously choose how they wanted to experience reality. Evidence for this meta-consciousness development appears in the archaeological record as increasingly elaborate systems for consciousness training that go far beyond simple skill instruction. Teaching methods designed to develop specific mental states, practice regimens structured to enhance particular cognitive capabilities, evaluation systems that measured not just technical competence, but consciousness development itself. The most advanced of these consciousness training systems were remarkable institutions that combined practical fire mastery with systematic mental development. Students weren't just learning to make and control fire, they were learning to make and control their own minds, developing capabilities for awareness, attention, creativity, and collaboration that transformed them into more capable human beings. These training systems were creating individuals with unprecedented mental capabilities. People who could maintain multiple perspectives simultaneously. Minds that could switch fluidly between different modes of consciousness depending on situational requirements. Awareness that could integrate individual insight with collective wisdom seamlessly. But the development of enhanced consciousness wasn't just about individual capability. It was creating new possibilities for collective human achievement that transcended anything previously imaginable. Groups of consciousness-trained individuals could coordinate their mental activities in ways that generated collective intelligence far beyond the sum of individual contributions. Archaeological sites reveal evidence of collective projects that would have been impossible without this enhanced group consciousness capability. Massive construction works that required precise coordination between hundreds of individuals across multiple years. Complex resource management systems that balanced competing needs across entire regions. Long-term planning projects that maintained coherent direction across multiple generations. These achievements weren't just better organization or superior technology. They emerged from forms of collective consciousness that had never existed before in the natural world. Groups of individuals who had learned to align their awareness and coordinate their mental activities could function as unified intelligences that solved problems no individual mind could comprehend. The success of these collective consciousness experiments was creating powerful evolutionary pressures that selected for enhanced mental capabilities across entire populations. Individuals who could effectively participate in group consciousness activities had significant survival advantages, gradually shifting human mental development toward greater cognitive sophistication and collaborative capability. So here we are, 5.5 million years later, sitting in our climate-controlled homes, tapping on devices that would seem like pure magic to those first firekeepers. Yet every time we flip a light switch, start our cars, or cook a meal, we're channeling that same revolutionary spark our ancestors first captured in the darkness of prehistoric Africa. The mastery of fire didn't just change what humans could do, it changed who we became. It transformed us from another species struggling for survival into beings capable of reshaping reality itself through collective intelligence and shared purpose. Every achievement of human civilization, from the wheel to the internet, traces its lineage back to those flickering flames that first extended the day into night and opened infinite possibilities for human consciousness. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember that you carry within you the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who chose to reach beyond their limitations, to build something greater than themselves, and to pass the torch of human potential forward through time. The fire they lit still burns within every human heart, reminding us that our greatest adventures lie not behind us, but ahead, waiting to be illuminated by the eternal flame of human curiosity, creativity, and courage. By the eternal flame of human curiosity, creativity, and courage.